The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
So we are here today on Titans of Nuclear with Isabelle Boemeke, who is definitely the star influencer throughout the nuclear space, but who also over the last year, who I've grown to know is quite knowledgeable and just an amazing advocate and educator on the topic as well. Isabelle, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. I did a lot of research for my content, and I basically listened to every single episode of Titans of Nuclear, so I'm happy to be here.
Oh my God. Well, then you know the format. We'd love to hear about your history. I also encourage people to listen to your episode with Chris on the Decouple podcast. I just think he's an awesome interviewer, and I've really enjoyed listening to that conversation between you guys as well. But let's do some of it over here. Tell us about your upbringing.
So I grew up in Brazil, but not in a big city in Brazil. I grew up in a very, very small town in the south of Brazil, which, you know, most people, when they think of my country, they think of Rio and samba and beach and like party. I am from a completely different part where it's just a bunch of farms, a lot of cattle, and a lot of crops.
Yeah.
And also a bunch of people speaking German randomly.
Okay.
And yeah, that's where I grew up. Grew up religious, Catholic, like most people in my country. Didn't really question much because there is not a lot to question when that's all you know. When I was a little bit older, I moved to a bigger city and, you know, widened my perspective of the world a little bit, but still very much confined to the country that I was in, which is Brazil is not a very scientific country, I would say, especially growing up in school. I remember not being encouraged to ask questions and to question what I was learning. So when I was older, about 16 years old, I actually got discovered. This sounds so silly, even speaking about it in these terms, but I got discovered to be a model when I was leaving my school. And that's when I finally, you know, saw the opportunity to leave Brazil and to get to know the world. And that was a really exciting opportunity for me at the time. And I moved around a little bit.
How did you know how to handle that? If somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I want you to be a model," okay, that would never happen to me, but if it did, my initial reaction might be a little skeptical. Like, is this person going to kidnap me or something?
Yes, it was definitely interesting because I was leaving my school and this guy runs up to me and he has a camera guy behind him and he's holding up a microphone and he puts the microphone on my face and says, "Are you a model?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, we're having this competition in your city tomorrow. Would love if you could participate." And then after, you know, the cameras are off and he was telling me about all the opportunities I would have to travel the world and meet a bunch of different people and make money while doing it. And to be honest, I've always had a desire to leave Brazil. I don't know why. And I think now, actually, even though I was really young, I now see it as me looking at American movies and recognizing that even the poor people in America had it pretty good compared to people in Brazil. And just seeing the opportunities that people had here. You know, I grew up seeing my mom, who, by the way, went to university and had superior education, just struggling to find jobs and working all day long while studying at university at night. And she just worked really, really hard, but we couldn't move forward economically. So I think I was able to recognize that, and that's what inspired me to leave and search for new opportunities.
And then, so where did it take you? I mean, you get to travel the world. Is it? I mean,
Yeah,
how does that look like?
so it first took me to São Paulo, which is the biggest city in Brazil. Is not the capital, but it's the biggest city. Then I went to Argentina for a couple of months. I learned to speak Spanish there, had a great time. Then I came to the US. I first landed in Miami, which, imagine, a 17-year-old coming from Brazil and Argentina, landing in Miami, looking at, all the opportunities in the United States, but also the fun in Miami. It was definitely a great time. Then I went to Europe for a while, traveled all around Europe, and came back to the US and just kind of moved between Miami, New York, and then finally Los Angeles.
And just to get a little bit better sense of what your life is like, when you're living in these different places, do you just have like events that you go to on a weekly basis, on a daily basis? Do you get to just spend a lot of time with the people and experience the culture? What logistically, what does it look like?
Yeah, so when I was really young and 18, 17, traveling around the world, the agency usually has model apartments, and they put all the models in the same spot. They're usually not glamorous at all. These are usually like 2-bedrooms apartments, and they put 8 girls in it, and terrible furniture. And we're just going to castings every day, getting jobs here and there. The great thing and the terrible thing about modeling is that it really prepares you to hear no and keep going, because every day is like you have a job interview and you're being told no more times than you're being told yes. And
sounds
yet,
like the life of an entrepreneur.
Exactly. And I think that I eventually became an entrepreneur, and I think that was very helpful. You don't take it personally.
Yeah,
you just keep going.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun. And I did live like a local, because they would put us in apartments in normal neighborhoods in the cities, and I was there for months at a time. And so you end up, having to go to the supermarket and buy your food and getting to know the people, the restaurants around. So it was definitely an incredible experience. Just, I would have never had this opportunity had it not been for modeling.
Wow.
I learned so many different languages. I met so many different people, a lot of creative people as well in the fashion industry, which is why I think I can do the content that I do as well, because I've worked with creatives for 13 years. So,
and what was like the next like milestone or break point? Was there a moment where you stopped kind of just traveling, trying to pick up jobs here and there, and settled in one area or another on a little bit more of a long-term basis?
Yeah, so I eventually came back to the US and I started getting jobs pretty much every day. And that's when I personally didn't see the need to keep traveling. The goal with traveling so much is basically to build materials so you can eventually settle in a place, especially New York, since it's the fashion capital of the world, and you can just get jobs consistently. And so I got to that point and decided to kind of slow down. And to be honest, I mean, as much as I enjoy modeling a lot, it's super fun. You're never bored. You're never sitting at an office looking at a computer all day. You're always, at least for an extrovert, is the perfect job, because you're traveling and chatting with people all day, fun, creative folks again. And, we talk a lot about the diversity, and the fashion industry is one of the most diverse industries in the world. And ironically, I mean, it's not ironically, but, a fact is that female models make a lot more money than male models. So it's probably one of the only industries where women make a lot more money than men. So it was definitely great, but it just never fulfilled me intellectually. Obviously, that's not the circle. So I always craved something else. And I knew that eventually I would start my own thing, or start a company or something else.
And so when did that come to fruition? And what was the first idea? When you were really kind of your own boss and really trying to build your own business? And do you remember if there was a specific source of inspiration that kicked it off?
Yeah, so again, since I was little, I had this idea that, okay, I would use modeling as a way to get out of Brazil, get to see the world, and then eventually I would make my own money to be able to start my own business. I didn't know what that business was. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have this, they have this dream of having their thing, but they don't know what. And at the time, I was very into skincare. I still am very into skincare and cosmetics and all of that. I think a lot of women are. And I decided to just create my own line. so it was just this idea. Okay, I want to start my own cosmetics line. Of course, I didn't know anything about A, starting a company, but B, also skincare or how to make skincare. So of course, I went to the best university in the world, YouTube, and no, literally, I think that nowadays anybody with an internet connection and enough curiosity can learn pretty much anything on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I actually learned how to make cosmetics, and I faked a brochure, designed it on Photoshop and faked that I had an existing company and sent it to a manufacturing company so they could send me bulk samples of ingredients. They sent me all of that for free.
Clever.
Yes, and I bought some stuff on Amazon, and I started making cosmetics in my kitchen. And I played around with a bunch of formulas, finally settled on one that I liked. And at the time, the idea was, I was, still traveling even within the US a lot for work, and always with makeup on and always with harsh lights on. So the idea was to create a face mist that would hydrate the skin on the go. And because I'm from Brazil, I wanted to use Brazilian ingredients and kind of, have like a Brazilian brand.
Yeah.
And so I developed a coconut water face mist, and had to call all different manufacturers and get a packaging that I found suitable. At the time, it was also, I wanted it to be the most eco-friendly as it could be. So I found this fully recyclable spray can, which most aerosol cans are not fully recyclable, and they also have propellants which are harmful. So this used only compressed air. The ingredients were all natural, didn't have any fake preservatives. So that was definitely a learning experience. And throughout the process, I did everything myself. I did the marketing myself. I designed the packaging myself. I designed the website myself.
Amazing. So you're learning, product marketing, product development, you're learning and business and finance aspect of it. I mean, you're doing this all on your own dime. And so you probably feel the economics of it much more tangibly than someone who's just working at a company doing a similar thing.
Right. But also that allowed me to create a company with very little money, because I literally did everything myself.
Yeah.
And so I launched the product. And as soon as I launched the product, I realized there was a bigger opportunity of creating an incubator of cosmetics to reach out to people like me who had an idea, were passionate about something, but didn't know the first thing about starting a skincare line. And so I worked on that for a little bit. And then, to be honest, the end of 2019, I got really depressed with the fires in Australia and the Amazon. And I had kind of an existential crisis and thought to myself, does the world need another skincare brand? And the answer was very clearly no. Yeah. And I decided to put an end to that and use all the skills that I had learned and everything I had gathered in the last, 13 years to do something different.
And so this idea of environmentalism obviously is a vein that courses through your life story. Now that you're at the point where that you want to do something, go hard on this idea of sustainability and forge business around it, from the get-go, or not even a business, but some initiative, and we'll see where it goes in your story. How did you decide? How do you narrow it down? There's so many things. There's water, there's air, there's pollution, there's a million different things. How do you know where to go?
Yeah, so because my existential crisis was fueled by the fires, really, in the Amazon and Australia, and especially this video of this native woman in the Amazon crying because her whole village was burned down. Yeah. And of course, when you look at the history of Native people in Brazil, they've had to endure so much already. And then now they're also enduring these natural disasters. And I know that we cannot trace any specific fire to climate change, but we also know that they're increasing in frequency, right? And of course, it also probably has to do with the fact that I am a millennial and I grew up with climate change being the environmental issue that we care about, right? And so having all of that, I decided to actually look into what it would take to solve climate change. not just complain about it and be miserable and be depressed about the whole thing. So I started buying a bunch of books and reading into it, and pretty soon realized that nuclear energy had to be a part of the solution. But a parallel story, which is something that happened even before this, was that in 2015 or 2016, Caroline Porco, who is a big NASA scientist, tweeted something about molten salt thorium reactors. And she said they were a much better technology than wind, and that we should be investing in it. And I became so curious about it. But at the time, 2015, 2016, I tried Googling it, but good luck understanding what a molten salt thorium reactor is.
Seriously. Yeah, it's interesting because you're not the first person who I've heard say there's thorium that kind of brought them into the sector, and then they realized just the advantages of the sector as a whole and not even one specific technology. But yes, it is daunting for an outsider without like a high level of technical training to even approach the sector, because I don't know if they do it on purpose, but there's so many terms and acronyms and concepts that feed on other concepts that it's hard.
Right. It's really challenging. And that at the time I found it was more challenging, but it could also be because I didn't have the foundation of nuclear energy knowledge to begin with, right? Because to begin to understand what a molten salt thorium reactor is, you have to understand what nuclear energy is. And at the time I had no idea.
Right.
But I've always had this curiosity, and I would ask people, I've circulated a lot in circles where there are a lot of scientists, and I would ask them, have you heard of molten salt reactors? And most of them hadn't. But the funny thing is that most people behind the scenes will tell you, oh yeah, nuclear is great and we actually should use it, but they won't say it publicly. And so fast forward to end of 2019, I got this depression, started reading into what it would take. Nuclear energy came up again, and then I remember thinking, all those times where people would tell me behind closed doors that it was great, but they wouldn't say it publicly. And I realized, well, there is an opportunity for me to come out and try to explain to people the benefits of nuclear power, so I can actually buy them social license to come out in support. And
interesting. And so I guess what types of people did you have a specific target audience in mind that you felt I know you said you hung out in circles of scientists, but is there a more defined persona of this person who you will support nuclear in private but not in public?
A lot of leaders in the business community, for sure. A lot of just scientists in general, obviously physicists, or even astronomers or astrophysicists. These are all people who are generally positive towards nuclear. But a lot of business leaders, like I said, but these are all people that again won't say it publicly for fear of retaliation. and
see, this is something I've struggled with, so maybe we can just explore it together a little bit. What is it about a person? So maybe I like poking the bear, and so I've never had a problem with that. If you believe in something, say it. If some people don't like it, okay, too bad for them. It's not like you're going to lose your friends. Your real and if you do lose your friends, they're not really good friends. But it's and so maybe I don't know. Other people are just more scared. Do you have any thoughts on that? As to why it is, if you've got conviction about something that people will hold back? It's not I guess in today's cancel culture, but it's not one of those types of things that you'll lose your spot on a board of directors or anything if you come out in support of nuclear. The repercussions just don't seem that bad, right? There's social and professional. I can't really see it hurting people professionally, and social, it's tough luck,
Right. I think it's different personalities. I've always been okay with also saying it as it is, to, maybe a fault. I tend to be pretty straightforward, and I speak my mind, for better or for worse. The other thing is that I think the environmental movement has been extremely effective at communicating anti-nuclear sentiment and at tangling nuclear energy with nuclear weapons. And so I think in a lot of people's minds, whenever you're supporting nuclear energy, you're automatically supporting nuclear weapons or something like that. So maybe there is a little bit of that. And you also have to remember that a lot of these folks, I'm talking about, are older, of an older generation. So the anti-nuclear sentiment in their generation is even greater, right? Whereas for us, right, it's ingrained. Whereas for us, and for me, myself at least, there was like a generally negative reaction to nuclear, but it's not as emotionally deep as someone who grew up with the fears of nuclear war.
Yeah. So, all right. So you've identified a problem. You're like, hey, I can come in and I can do this thing or that thing, and maybe like really even influence not just in my like social, I'm speaking as you now, not just in my social network, but like a much like broader conversation about the topic. And like you said, grant people a social license, perhaps people that you don't even know. How are you going to actually, okay, so you had that idea. How are you actually going to implement it?
Yeah, so my idea, it was actually funny because it was out of the blue. I remember I was brushing my teeth. It was like 31st of December, something like that. I was brushing my teeth, looking in the mirror, and I said, what if I become a nuclear energy influencer and just create the types of content that people are attracted to on social media? Things like selfies, outfit of the day photos, makeup tutorials, my diet videos, and just use that to actually talk about something that matters, which is climate change, and in this case specifically nuclear energy. And the idea was very clear to me from the beginning. So it was just hijacking popular content to talk about nuclear energy. Of course, the execution, when you have an idea, it looks perfect in your head, and then when you start executing, you come across all different types of barriers. But I think that's where my experience with entrepreneurship and launching my brand was helpful, because I just kept going.
Yeah, and it is pretty incredible. And I see this now. I mean, I think when you came about, like, I'm not on social media really, other than LinkedIn, if you consider that social media. And I hadn't even seen TikTok, when you were coming to prominence. But now I've like looked into it a little. Sorry, I sound like a grandpa. I've looked into TikTok.
Okay, boomer.
But it does seem like these channels offer this incredibly like low overhead infrastructure to build a brand to like quite a massive audience. And it's almost like a bit of I think it's more meritocratic than almost any other channel, because 100%. Since there's so much content out there, and now I think with like the algorithms that are not even like, I don't even know how much they take into account like likes and stuff. It's really just like tracking the time. I think with TikTok, it's literally just tracking the time that you spend on the content between you flip. It does seem like extremely meritocratic. So if you've got like an interesting, compelling way to present a message, you can go from, the 2 people looking at it to, 20,000 to 200,000, or perhaps even more in a very short period of time with very little investment. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Especially with platforms like TikTok. And you're right, the algorithm really favors just engaging content. At the time I started my TikTok account with 0 followers, for Isodope, because for Instagram and Twitter, I already had some following from my modeling career and all of that. But TikTok, I started from scratch, and it grew pretty quickly. And it's all because I am creating, engaging content. And just, I think that there's a lot of resistance from older audiences to just accepting that people are on social media that much, and that's how people will consume information, especially in the future. But I think we should engage with it in the opposite way, of just recognizing how amazing it is that you actually can distribute good educational content to millions of people without putting that much effort.
It's so amazing. And maybe this is an even broader conversation, but like the way that it almost kind of like trains your brain in these like little bite-sized increments, it almost reminds me of like flashcards, like when I'd study. Sorry, once again, like these sound like really dated. I'm not that old, I swear. These are really dated. like when you study math equations, you do like a little bite-sized like bit of a chunk, then you put it down, and you pick back up the deck of cards and you do it again. And that is, somehow people figured out over time that like the way that the brain is hardwired is like, this is very easy way to like, accumulate a lot of information in these short little bursts.
Right.
So
and the truth is like we can pass a moral judgment on whether that's good or bad. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. That's how technology is progressing. And so what we can do is actually just use it, for a good end. And that's what I've tried to do, which is, people are, again, for better or for worse, people engage with this type of content. People are attracted to, makeup tutorials and diet videos and all of that. Okay, how can I use that to then talk about something interesting instead of just, complaining about it?
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember, and like, do you remember that one girl who was like doing a makeup tutorial and then started talking about like the Uyghurs in China? Like it was like a real like.
Oh right.
You remember that? And like that made like national mainstream. Like ABC like was showing that on like the nightly news. It's like so it is pretty interesting.
Yes, it's powerful, and it's also just recognizing where people are and engaging with them.
So how do you get feedback from this though? I guess I'm interested when you put a piece of content out there, other than just a bunch of likes and shares, and maybe even some people writing back to you, are there any other ways to really engage with the audience to make sure that they're getting the correct takeaways from what you're trying to communicate?
I think it's mostly through comments and just making sure I respond to people.
And you do? Is there that interaction on the platform?
Yes, I definitely try to. I mean, of course, you have to be selective and know which people are actually open to having a conversation and which ones are just trolling or trying to be offensive or, commenting just to be snarky at you. So I try to be selective and just waste my time really with those who are confused and who have questions. I mean, with the work that we have to do, we're not just trying to educate people on a subject. We're trying to deprogram them from decades of bad information put out into the world.
Boy, oh boy, that is not easy. But and I guess which platform are you most active on? Is it Twitter or is it TikTok? Or
it's Twitter. I'm very addicted to Twitter, unfortunately. But I try to be on all of them all the time, but Twitter is my favorite.
And because you made that comment about decades of reprogramming, I know that the TikTok audience skews younger, and so I'm wondering if people are just naturally more open-minded on that platform because they don't have that decades of programming. Then Twitter, I guess, has accumulated enough of an older audience.
Yes, I think you're right. And TikTok is younger. Definitely my audience on TikTok is very surprising. It's 82% female. Yeah, and they're like between 14 and 25 years old. So very, very young, mostly female. And these are mostly, it's pretty incredible actually, especially for a science communicator.
I'm just like, I'm like just sitting in my head thinking, God, how many like budding engineers has she inspired?
I hope. I mean, that's the hope, right? And I think a big part of what I do as well is not only to change public perception and give folks the social license to speak publicly about nuclear, but also I think that the problems that the nuclear industry faces are not unsolvable, right? There's nothing like the problem of cost. There is nothing about a nuclear power plant, and you know this better than I do, that makes it intrinsically expensive. It's not made of unicorn hair or like
I'm so glad you're saying this. I mean, this is the point I hammer home, and I do not think most people in the nuclear industry get, like professionals in the space, engineers in the space, do think that it's made of unicorn. Like, I don't know how, but they do think it's made of unicorn hair.
Right. It's not. It's made of very normal materials. And I mean, except for like uranium, maybe, or the fissile material, but even that is like pretty abundant. And like, yes, right. Yeah. So the cost issue, you can always bring it down. I mean, we saw it with renewables, and I know people will say, well, you don't understand how manufacturing works, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yes, I kind of understand that, you cannot make millions of nuclear power plants in a day, but you can still reduce the costs quite significantly. And a big part of why I think we haven't been able to solve is also because who is going to study nuclear engineering if all you hear when you're growing up is that this is an evil technology and it's a dead industry, that, you know, if you want to work on energy, you should work on solar panels or wind turbines. These are only people who, you know, either their parents were nuclear engineers or were interested in this area, or people who just luckily came across it, right?
So that's a really good point, and I've noticed that in my interviews, like because I've interviewed people in all different, you know, age brackets, and the story is pretty consistent across like the year that they came into it, but, you know, very inconsistent across the decades. Like in the beginning, it was like, hey, there was this oil crisis, and like we wanted to get involved so like we weren't dependent on foreign powers. You know, and even before that, I met some people who are like pretty old, and they're like, oh, it was like the futuristic technology. It was like, you know, the Jetsons and nuclear were the same thing. And then like, you know, a little bit later, it's like, oh, you know, it was you know, I took like a power engineering course, and it was still a, you know, vibrant enough sector, and so I kind of ended up there just from doing, you know, like thermal engineering work. And then the real shame is this last cohort. I mean, God bless them that there's still enough people out there.
Right.
A lot of it is just a kind of, this is like almost every time. It's like, I went to like my freshman engineering class where they introduced us to a whole bunch of engineerings, and nuclear seemed cool. And I just, for some reason, had never really heard something bad about it. So I decided to do that one. And I'm like, that's not enough to like create a really vibrant
industry. Exactly. And that's exactly my point. Imagine the amount of brain power that we could have in the industry if it was seen as a net positive to the world.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So that's a second part of my work, is just inspiring future, you know, business people and engineers and whoever else wants to work in the industry to actually pursue it.
Do we have a sense of like which pieces of content are most I mean, you put a lot of stuff. Actually, can you just describe a little bit about what the content might look like for those who haven't seen it? And then maybe, you know, can you compare and contrast one that worked really well and one that didn't work quite as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have different audiences in each platform. And so the content varies a little bit in terms of effectiveness. But of course, the content that does the best for me is the, you know, bait and switch, which I start with a normal model video of, hey guys, a lot of you have been asking about my skincare routine. And then I suddenly merge into talking about nuclear energy. Those are very popular.
God, I love it. Who knew that would work so well?
I know it could have. That's the thing about this project, is that it could have failed miserably, and it would have just been this like embarrassing attempt at something that didn't work or didn't go anywhere. But, you know, I thought it was worth pursuing. So those are very, very popular. The ones that are least popular, I would say, are somewhere I'm just giving straight up facts. You know, not using other style or other types of content in it. But yeah, the ones bait and switch are very, very popular, but, you know, they're very hard to do as well, and it takes me a while. And to be honest, I don't want to make every single one of my videos that, because it kind of loses the specialness of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, now I'm starting to look forward to creating other types of content as well, to make
I want to hear about that.
Yeah, so as you know, it gets to a point where it's impossible basically to communicate the things that I have to communicate in 1 minute. Even if I try really hard.
Done a pretty good job so far, I have to say.
Right, but it's getting to a point where, okay, I need more than a minute just to give the nuances. And the waste issue is a perfect example.
Oh God.
Yeah.
And we can talk for an hour on that and still not hit all the nuances.
Yeah. Right. And it's interesting because to me the waste is actually one of the good parts of nuclear energy, in that, and I don't need to preach to you because you probably agree with me, in that it is the only waste that is actually contained.
Yeah, it's the only one that's like totally accounted for, and oh, by the way, it can become other productive things as well.
Exactly. Totally accounted for. The industry itself is responsible for it.
I know.
Right? You want to talk about waste. I mean, let's look at plastic waste, for instance, which, by the way, I find it a much bigger problem than nuclear waste. the industry has zero responsibility. It's literally dumping plastic into the oceans, which is causing all these other massive problems.
Yep.
And now it's like nonprofit organizations and who else knows is having to care for that waste and find ways of disposing it. It's insane.
Yeah.
And then we talk about, let's not even talk about fossil fuel waste, right? It's just spewing into the air, contaminating our air, our water, killing at least 5 million people every single year.
I know,
with zero accountability.
But this is what makes it challenging. I agree. Maybe we agree. I'd love to hear your explanation. But what I've come across, why the nuclear industry is responsible for its own perception problem of waste. What I've come across is it's not just from being bad marketers. It's actually because like there is a huge business right around the fear of nuclear and scientists. Spending godless, government research dollars to try to cook it up. I mean, like one way the industry was essentially bought off from not saying the waste is not that big a deal was the amount, $6 billion got injected through all of the channels of the nuclear industry to fund researchers, scientists, anyone who would have normally said, just come out and say, I'm a scientist. Like, listen, this is like one of the least environmental problems that we have to deal with. Instead, they got 100,000 grant, and it wasn't like intentional. I'm not saying there's conspiracy, but this is just the way that the incentive structure developed to keep them from saying that it's not a problem.
That could be true. I think. I mean, also nuclear waste. Let's face it, it's dangerous if not managed properly, right?
So I don't think you jump on it and eat it.
Exactly. if it's not managed properly, and so you can't see a scenario where like in the plastics industry, if people are throwing it somewhere, of course it would be harmful. So there is an argument to be made that it has to be handled properly in order for it not to be dangerous. But once it is, then yes, it doesn't make sense to keep fear mongering. And the truth is, I mean, it makes sense. Your argument makes sense because the industry is unfortunately declining. And so maybe this was a way they saw to, keep the business going.
Yes. Absolutely.
If we're not going to be making more energy, then maybe we can manage this waste for, thousands of years and pretend like we need all these people around it to protect it.
That's exactly right. I mean, it is a desperate downward spiral of self-cannibalism.
Right. And the truth is, now it's just making things way more difficult than they have to be. And I don't know how we can walk back from that, from changing the public perception that the waste is not that big of a deal if the industry itself is saying that, it is.
This is a problem. I mean, this is a problem across industry, not just waste, but like radiation safety, siting consideration. I mean, they're all there. Waste is not the only one where the industry is our own worst enemy in terms of public communication. So what are you going to do about
it? What I'm going to do about the waste? Well, I have figured out a way to solve the waste.
Well, not to solve the waste, but solve the perception. Solve the perception.
Solve the perception.
Yeah.
Well, I'm working on a series which I've been working on for almost a year now, which is embarrassing. But the truth is, I decided it was a bad idea, but I decided to include renewables waste in it.
Okay.
And I made a bunch of calculations with nuclear engineers and some other folks in the nuclear industry to get the numbers correctly. But I thought it would be better if I reached out to someone on the renewable side to do those calculations because, it's only fair, right? That's their industry. Just like if someone was talking about nuclear waste, I would have appreciated if they reached out to somebody in the nuclear industry. So that's what I did. And of course, it added a whole other level of complexity and back and forth and calculations and disagreements and so on and so forth. So I'm still not done with all those calculations, but, we're getting there. And then I also want to address the issue that even if we stop using nuclear energy today and we shut down every single nuclear power plant in the world, the waste is still going to be there. So the big question is, what are we going to do with it? And then I want to highlight that the possibilities are we can recycle and reuse it for fuel for next generation of reactors. We can just leave them in the casks and just change the casks every 100 years or so as they deteriorate, which is, I don't find that idea compelling, but some people like it. Or as you know, we can just put them in deep geological formations.
Well,
And
I like the hybrid approach of the first two you said. I mean,
mhm,
just to think we were riding horses and buggies 100 years ago, back
right.
in New York, to like the hubris to think that
Mhm,
100 years from now they won't be able to have like a much more cost-effective, better technology to handle all of this, including next gen reactors too. Those will
mhm,
certainly be about even 20, 30 years from now. To say that
right.
that is not good enough to put it in these 100-year casks, which by the way, when I speak to people, they say it's not 100 years. They like get the stamp for 100 years, but it's really like 200
Right.
plus years or more.
Mhm,
Like, I
right.
mean, it's grout. Like we have grout around, like cement. We have cement around from Roman times that's still intact. Um,
Right. Yeah, just an estimation because we don't know yet. But we have to consider that for that you need surveillance and this and that. So it just again adds, a number of people that have to be in charge of it. But have you come across deep isolation?
I have mixed feelings, but go ahead.
Well, but at least they're offering a solution where you can actually bury it deep and it's retrievable. So in the future, if we do come up with a solution, which hopefully we will, I mean, it makes no sense not to, we can actually retrieve the waste and reprocess and use it as fuel.
Yeah, I think my biggest criticism is if that's the strategy, you don't have to go deep. You don't have to use this their whole pitch is like, listen, we're using this horizontal drilling technology from the oil industry. They're going to convince governments to spend billions of dollars on their product. That's going to be the driving incentive behind the business. Whereas you could literally just find a bunch of shallow isolation areas that water hasn't run through for the last million years for whatever geological reason, and for almost no money, you could just put it there.
I haven't come across that. You should send it to me definitely,
Yeah.
so I can highlight in my video. But yeah, I mean the at the end though is just that we're even debating different solutions. So at the end of the day, I just want to show people that we not only have a solution to the waste problem, we have several.
Yeah.
And we can actually choose.
Yeah.
So this idea that we don't know what to do with the waste is completely false. We actually do know. We just have to get it going. And I actually think we should settle on something soon just so we can move forward.
Yeah. Good luck though, because it's like it's kind of like you've heard the whole thing in like U.S. politics where the reason the Democrats have had many chances to tie minimum wage to inflation, so it increases every year automatically, and they never even push for it because they like the fight, because the fight is their business. The fight is how they get more, how they get their base riled up to always be fighting for minimum wage and never actually solve the problem. I feel like that is, once again, a big case with the nuclear industry. They like being in limbo because then they get to go to Congress and ask for billions of dollars to constantly be trying to solve it.
And to be fair, I think there is no incentive for the environmental community as well to want a solution, because the moment you have a solution to nuclear waste, then you basically don't have an argument against it, right?
Exactly right. So, and I should have clarified, so it wasn't just making fun of Democrats. The exact same thing. It's both sides like the fight, and so in the case of minimum wage, the Republicans like it, Democrats like it because it's something to fight over. And then in the case of nuclear waste, the nuclear scientists don't want a solution, and the environmentalists don't want a solution because it's something to fight over.
Right, exactly. It's just this, so we can keep holding on to our arguments forever and die thinking that we were right.
That is a bit depressing.
I know. That's why, did you see all the UFO videos this week?
Yeah, what's going on with that? Like, I literally just was flipping through the news last night, and it's like everyone is commenting on it. Is this like, what is going on?
I don't know. I saw this 60-minute interview with some people who were, in the military, and they were tracking UFOs, and there were some testaments of I don't know, 4 or 5 different folks talking about how they saw this unidentified flying objects, and they were flying at speeds that we don't have the technology for, and they were disappearing or just like going underwater, and there's footage of it. But of course the footage is always grainy and always like it could be something else, but it could also be a UFO. So it's very unclear, but it's the documents are being unclassified. All the videos have been unclassified, so they're now publicly available, and the government itself admits that they don't know what it is.
I'm trying to like figure out what they're trying to distract us from, that they're releasing this as like something else going on in the world that they just do not want us paying attention to. So they're just like throwing UFO videos at us.
I mean, to be honest, I think it's highly unlikely that it's aliens.
Yeah.
But the truth is,
and
it's
you
not
know,
impossible.
you dress up like one all the time.
Exactly, I am an alien basically. No, but it's not impossible, right? I mean, what I think is impossible is that in the whole universe, we're the only technologically advanced species. I think that's what's impossible or unlikely.
I could not agree with you more. I both believe that there are other alien species, and that these videos are probably a bit of a joke.
Exactly, to my point. But to outright say, no, it's never aliens, it's impossible, I don't think we should take that approach. But my point I was trying to make with the UFO videos is that I was like, God, I hope it's aliens, because it's finally going to force us to get our act together and like actually collaborate and work to solve. Because unfortunately, I think it's human nature a little bit. We just don't solve things and don't take things seriously until we're all about to die.
Yeah, I've struggled with that concept though, because like with COVID and everything, I thought that we would treat a virus as this like alien threat. It kind of is. Viruses kind of are aliens,
Right. Well, it's not human, at least.
Right. And so I would have thought that like this could have been something that like brought the whole world together, and like we resolved our differences to like eliminate like not just COVID, but like all viruses. Like we set up, like how we set up the International Space Station to like do this like international collaboration. Like I would have thought like the result of COVID would have been, we're going to set up these like 20 research centers that are cross-disciplinary and cross-country, and like we just solve all viruses forever. But maybe that was too optimistic of me.
Yeah, I agree. But the only hope we have is to keep pushing for that, right? It's just let's keep pushing, and maybe we make progress very slowly, but we do. And I mean, history tells us that, right? When we look back, people love to complain about how, oh, this is the worst time and everything is so messed up. But when you look historically, I mean, if I could have chosen to be born at any point in time, I would have chosen now, especially being a woman. So I think the only hope we have is to keep pushing forward and keep progressing very slowly but surely.
Yeah. So I want to cover just two more things with you before we wrap up. What's coming next for you? I know you're going to release the series that you've been spending a lot of time on. Any other projects that you kind of got cooking up in the background?
Yeah, so one of them is the campaign to save Diablo Canyon, which I talked about publicly before, and it's something that I'm still actively working on. I'm sure you're familiar with the issue around our existing nuclear fleet.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are shutting down. This year already, Indian Point was shut down, and then we have 2 plants in Illinois coming up. And of course, every time the plants shut down, the politicians promise they're going to be fully replaced by renewables, and surely enough, they're not. Every single time. It's almost like a joke at this point, right? And then we have big environmental organizations like the NRDC actually celebrating the shutdown of existing nuclear plants, which goes against what their mission is.
How can they be so openly hypocritical? I just don't get it. I mean, they're not even trying to hide the hypocrisy.
You have to, once you understand the history of the environmental movement in the United States, it makes a lot more sense. And I did a lot of research for a podcast that I did recently specifically on Diablo Canyon. And, it kind of explains the reason why I'm also focusing on Diablo, because it is the most politically relevant plant in the United States, period. Not only because it's in California, which is considered, kind of a leader in the environmental front, even though it might be ironic at points, it is. But also because the build out and opening of Diablo Canyon basically divided the environmental movement at the time. So the Sierra Club at the time had a president called William Siri, and he actually studied radiation. So he was pretty pro nuclear energy, and he settled in like 1964 with PG&E to open Diablo in San Luis Obispo, where it is now, in order to protect a different area where PG&E wanted to build a plant, but that doesn't matter. And whenever the Sierra Club actually agreed to open a nuclear power plant, a lot of its members kind of rebelled against it. And one of them, named David Brower, left and started Friends of the Earth. So, you know, kind of like the birth of a lot of these environmental organizations was directly related to nuclear power.
I've heard that.
And so it's ingrained, right? It's ingrained in their DNA.
Yeah.
The ironic thing, the funny thing about David Brower is that he was anti-immigration and he was very concerned with reducing population, right? So a lot of, again, this anti-nuclear sentiment ties back to just not wanting more humans on planet Earth and knowing that nuclear power could provide the electricity that people would need to just, you know, keep having kids. Yeah. So once you understand that, you understand why a lot of them are anti-nuclear. But, you know, in the case of the NRDC, I don't know, they state they're not anti-nuclear. I think they state they're anti-new nuclear, but in favor of keeping existing plants, but their track record shows something different. They've helped
could have fooled me.
Shut down plants. They exactly, they're literally celebrating the shutdown of Indian Point. And as we know, with Indian Point, it was fully replaced by natural gas the next day. And it will be for decades. Some people make the argument that it's just a little bump, you know, that it's eventually emissions will decrease. But the truth is, you know, emissions are not only bad in terms of climate change, they're also bad in terms of air pollution. So this little bump will actually cost lives.
Yeah.
You know, and especially lives of minority people who live close to this power plants.
Oh, I know. I'm always a little bit shocked about the, especially like within the nuclear regulators. In a certain sense, they've got, not that they're bad people or anything, but they've got this like very narrow mandate. The mandate is not to protect human life. The mandate is to protect people from radiation only, even if it means a net increase in risk to their health from other sources. And they stick dogmatically to that.
Right. Is that because they're still following the nonlinear threshold theory?
Yeah, and just in general, they just don't think it's the culture that's built in. Once again, nothing wrong with the people, some really, really smart people there, but they just don't have the mandate. It's never been built into the culture to consider anything other than radiation in their calculus of whether to approve new generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, and we can talk about this at some other point as well, but I think we need to also invest in scientific research around the effects of radiation, because there is some out there, but I think it needs to be much more so that the science becomes overwhelming, and to a point where if you actually disagree with it, then you're anti-science.
Yeah, I agree. I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you on that one.
But back to Diablo Canyon, because I want to finish this point. Yeah. What I like about Diablo, the reason why I focus so much on it is because it's super politically relevant, but also because I think that once California shuts down its last nuclear power plants, there is no way they're going to build even new generation reactors that, you know, are better, safer, whatever you wanna use to classify them. And the truth is, we still have time. To a lot of these other plants, like Illinois, you know, it's only a couple of weeks. In the case of Diablo, we have 3 years left for the first reactor and 4 for the second one. So there is still time. And also, things in California are changing very quickly. So we have the electric vehicle mandate kicking in 2035, which means the state will need a lot more electricity at night, because that's when people charge their cars.
Yeah.
And, you know, California is mostly solar. And at the end of the day, you know, if the sun is not out, as you know, we don't have electricity from solar. And it's probably going to be natural gas. The state has also authorized natural gas plants to keep operating as long as there's risk of blackouts, which is always. And, you know, especially after shutting Diablo, the risk of blackouts will increase. So there is a chance. It's all political. So it's all about just convincing people. It's all about getting people to understand what this means, what shutting down one single power plant that makes enough clean electricity for 3 million people, the effects that has, right?
Yeah.
And again, power plants now.
If you pull this off, this would be just a tremendous win, because it's going to be one of the harder ones to accomplish.
Exactly.
It's not like Illinois where they've got other plants and it's still an existing industry that can help like rally behind you. It's California, like you're kind of on your own out there.
It's definitely an uphill battle, but I think that if enough people speak up and enough people, want to help this cause, it's actually doable. I do believe it's doable, at least to extend the license for, I don't know, another 5 years, and then someone else comes into power, and maybe you can, talk to them differently, because we know Gavin Newsom is very anti-Diablo Canyon. So if somebody else comes into power, maybe they can see the benefits of the plant. And as you know, nuclear power plants now are being relicensed for up to 80 years. Yeah. and there's nothing that says they couldn't be relicensed for up to 100 years. So just keeping that amount of clean power, if you want to replace it at the end of the day, if you have all the renewables infrastructure in place and all the batteries, which I don't think you will soon enough, and you want to replace Diablo, fine. And then you want to build new generation of nuclear power plants, fine. But doing it right now when we clearly don't have the replacement in place. I mean, even the Union of Concerned Scientists, who you spoke to, one of its members.
Did you listen to that one?
Oh, I did listen to that. I was eating popcorn while I was listening to it. But even they put out a study saying that closing Diablo will lead to an additional 15.5 million metric tons of carbon emissions in the next decade. That's like keeping 300,000 gas-powered cars on the road for the next 10 years. Doing that purely for political reasons makes no sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. You're preaching to the choir here. I wish you the best of luck on that one. And yeah, if there's anything we can do, obviously, with our limited means, probably just interviewing people here and there, we're happy to chip in.
Thank you.
Okay, as we wrap up here today, I mean, this has been obviously a very interesting and wide-ranging conversation. I can't continue many more with you, but I just want to wrap up, with a little bit about your hopes and dreams for the future.
I mean, my hopes and dreams are that we actually are able to extend the license of all the nuclear power plants that are about to be shut down, and that they can help us decarbonize faster. And my hopes for the long-term future is that people realize that nuclear energy is actually the best solution we have, and not only in terms of climate change, but in terms of energy and energy poverty as well. And that we can build a future of clean, reliable, and abundant energy for everyone, no matter where they were born.
Isabelle Boemeke, can't end on a better note than that. Thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing your insights, thoughts, and progress with us.
Thank you so much, Brett.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.